Hey, everybody. Welcome to the ComSource Community Chat Summit. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about building and investing in community and why that means more than just setting up a few social media accounts. This is going to be about how both businesses and individuals, influencers, and creators can invest in their community and make sure that there's something that can drive value for them long term and that you get to stay in touch with them. And so as a quick intro, I'm Josh Constine. I was the former editor of TechCrunch for 8.5 years, and now I'm a VC at SignalFire, where I'm a principal and head of content. And we'll do a quick round of intros, and we're going to jump right into some quick tips for social management and building a community. Kat, why don't you give us a quick intro?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Kat, a partner at Y Combinator. So at YC, we've funded over 2,500 companies since 2005, and I've personally seen about 1,500 go through the program since I started in 2013. And I think of YC very much as a community itself. So the alumni and their support of each other is I think, the most powerful part of the organization. And before YC, I was the chief of staff to Alexis Ohanian, the founder of Reddit. So I obviously learned a lot from him on the power of online community building.
Awesome. Jesse?
Hey, thanks, Josh. So I am a partner. I run a fund called Flybridge Capital. We invest very directly in community-driven platforms and businesses, and talk about that more later. But prior to that, I was on the founding team of WeWork, where we had I spent 6 years building that from 4 to about 4,000 employees, and had one of the largest sort of in-person communities in the world, which we attempted to move into more digital tools as well, which we may get a little bit into.
Great. Awesome. So let's jump in with some big myths about community building and quick tips that people can use to improve. I think one thing that was really important when I figured this out was that social networks like Facebook and Twitter don't want links. They don't want people to click out of their platforms, because they want to keep people inside those social networks, scrolling through those feeds and viewing as many ads as possible. And that's why building your community entirely on top of a social network that you don't own is really risky. We call this platform risk in the tech world, where you're really beholden to somebody else's intentions. And you can see this happen in a lot of social networks. If you look at Medium, for instance, Medium used to be this really great sort of neutral place to do blogging, and it communicated some sense of prestige. But over time, Medium wasn't as focused on its readers. It was focused on its own business model. And so it put all these login pages up, and it was constantly sort of like nagging you to log in. It made it a lot more difficult for people to just consume content. And so I think it was really important for people to understand that these social networks aren't necessarily your best friends. They're great for building an audience, great for getting some distribution, especially for native content that lives inside of those networks, like photos or videos. But as soon as you're trying to push people out of that network, back to your business, back to earning money some way, it can be really difficult because they don't want to show those links. So I think it's just important for people to start off knowing that building a community means a lot more than just having a few social networks or social profiles, and that you need to be thinking about community that you own, whether that's through an email newsletter or SMS newsletter, your own forum or group, or something where you have an unmitigated channel where you're not dependent on an algorithm to decide whether you get to reach your community. Kat, maybe you could tell us another tip or something that you have learned through YC.
Yeah, sure. I love what you're saying about platform risk and really owning your channels. And I think another myth is that people think about community building in the realm of social, social sites, social companies, Reddit, Twitch, those types of platforms. But I think almost any company can be thought of as having, a built community, both whether it's in their customer base or, I think community can be very valuable for many, many types of companies. So I think thinking more broadly about community and what that means, and then the tools that you need to build your own kind of channels, I guess, is an important thing.
You guys have a really cool social network and sort of community through YC for your founders, right, called Bookface. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about this, because I feel like a lot of businesses that have big, sort of communities of clients or customers or even their own employees, having a kind of social network like this internally can be really valuable. Can you tell us a little bit about Bookface for Y Combinator?
Sure. So when YC first started, maybe, and up until maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, we were just using, email lists like Google, Google communities to send emails to all the founders. And once we started getting past a certain number, we realized that email was unsustainable. So we started to build our own software. The first version of it was built by Gary Tan, who's now at Initialized, and it's really grown since there. But essentially, Bookface is a forum where all the, it looks sort of like Quora in some ways, where founders can jump in, ask each other questions, support each other, tag themselves as experts in certain spaces. And every day you jump into Bookface and see at least 20 to 50 questions. And then we send a daily digest that, highlights the top Bookface posts. And I think, last time we ran the numbers, it was like over 50% of the YC community logs in, on a monthly basis to read through Bookface. And so it's, it's a pretty active forum. So yeah, we as you said, we've built our own channels that we own, and we're constantly sort of iterating based on what our founders say they want and need. So on top of the conversation, there's also, deals page or ways to kind of help each other out beyond that. So yeah, that's a little bit about Bookface.
That's awesome, because instead of it being this fully top-down community where it's like the Y Combinator partners distributing information to the founders, they can actually introduce information to each other through like an internal Q&A, and that takes some of the pressure off of the organizer or the community builder, I think, which is really important. If you're thinking about how do you make community without spending so much time, without hiring a ton of managers or people to run the community, if you can make the community sort of self-sustaining by developing peer-to-peer content, then it's going to you can sort of have it churning even when you're asleep, which I think is awesome. And I love that idea of a community Q&A where you're sort of taking knowledge from your internal community and making it really accessible, because these are the kind of questions, subjective questions, that can be tough to find good answers to online, or that you might feel a little bit uncomfortable sharing publicly. So a more private community for that can be awesome. Are there sorry, go ahead.
Sort of the development of these sort of more private communities, and our founders often will launch to each other before they launch externally to the world, and so getting that early feedback from the community has been super valuable over time.
Awesome. Jesse, maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the myths that you've encountered in community creation and how people can solve them.
Yeah, I think there's two things I bring up quickly here. One is that communities tend to be talked about around consumer platforms, consumer plays, and it's just I would say it's a complete myth that they can't be built around big enterprises. We look at companies like Salesforce. Mark Benioff and the early team there did an incredible job of building community, and you can see it in things like Dreamforce, or people putting it in their LinkedIn profile that they're Salesforce admins. We've invested in a number of companies that are more B2B or B2B2C. The second thing that I would say that's kind of along the lines of it working for enterprises is that oftentimes when we ask founders about their communities, they talk about it with regard to acquisition. And the truth about communities they're sort of this very holistic channel. Like if you think about, you talk about platform risk. When you work with Google or you work with Facebook to attract consumer approach, it's the top of the funnel. You don't control that channel. Communities built correctly are both acquisition, they're also customer success, their customer retention. They can be used for customer support. To Kat's point, I'm pointing at her square here on my screen at least. To Kat's point, these are people helping people, and all of those things feed back into potential acquisition in the future again. But it's that the myth being that communities are about acquisition top of funnel. The truth is that they make this sort of circular reference to every consumer or user on the platform.
And have you found any tools that really help you guys do this kind of stuff? So I was looking at, there's tools like QHub, an answer site where you can build your own Q&A website. Are there any other tools that you guys have found have been valuable for these things?
I mean, I would just say that we see our companies do two paths. In the beginning, they piecemeal things together. So they combine Webflow and subscription tools and Slack and you name it. And we're doing this in a company called Teal, which helps career people looking for jobs get more jobs more efficiently. But over time, the larger a community grows, the more unique their needs become. And so I think your point about platform risk is a good one. I think you need to be very careful about sort of if you use any of these tools to develop large enough communities, you need to be able to have some level of control and ability to export. And I think a good parallel will be in the financial world. Braintree, way back in the day, made this a point. The government basically mandated that you had to be able to take all your payment details out of your consumers because nobody wanted all their customers' payments locked up. And I think you want to make sure that's possible in any of the tools that you're using, to build your community now.
Yeah, that's a really important idea, that like you don't want all this contact information like locked in where you only have this mediated channel for reaching people. If you could get more of that contact information out of them, then you can be able to contact them through other channels, and you're not sort of totally beholden and at risk of being sort of steamrolled by that platform if they're going in a direction that you don't want. I learned this, in somewhat the hard way working with TechCrunch. For years, I wasn't building sort of a personal following. I had a Twitter that I was like gaining followers for, but I wasn't building a fully like unmediated channel, more like email, until maybe the last few years when I started to put up like a newsletter sign up link. I ended up actually getting 2,000 signups for my newsletter before I ever even sent it. And so it can be valuable to start building community before you can even activate it. But still, I probably left hundreds of thousands of like readers, even millions of readers over my like 8 years on the table when I left, and I don't really have access to them anymore. And so getting that contact information into a way that you have more control over, like you said, is really important. Are there any like CRM tools or things that you recommend for that? Or is it just like a newsletter builder or what?
I mean, the one thing I'll give a plug to Jacob and Mac, because they've been building ComSor, which is trying to do exactly that. And I think the challenge has been, and I'll keep this short, but the challenge has been is that all of the tools that are out there want to keep you in their silo as open as they are. So Slack has an awesome app directory, as does Salesforce, right? But at the end of the day, they're the home of that user record, that atomic unit of a community member. And I think there's a big blue ocean opportunity that we'd like to continue to invest in. So if anybody on this call is working on it, where it bridges those communities together and those data sets, because there actually aren't any things at scale that do that today. So there's some one-off ones, there's some early startups like ComSor, but nothing great that we've come across at least.
Totally, yeah. So you guys might wonder, like, where did this whole community chat summit thing come from? It came from ComSor, which is a SignalFire portfolio company, and they make tools for you to be able to collect and organize and contact and stay in touch with your community. So it's basically a community CRM. Instead of it just being a customer CRM, this is one for people that aren't necessarily paying you yet, but that you want to, to leverage, that you want to provide value to. So Shripriya, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you think of as some of the big community building myths and how people might be able to address them.
Sure. So the first one is that community is for easy products. So we actually feel the harder whatever you're trying to achieve is, the better community is. So, let's say you want to meditate, right? People have said things like, I wanted to have a meditation practice for years. It's hard. And so community is great for that. If you want to achieve something like, hey, I want to start my own business, very hard, several steps. Community is great for that. So the harder the goal is for what people want to achieve, the better community is. And the reason I believe that is because it's just such a community helps you keep you accountable. B, it gives you lots of ideas on your journey. And C, it kind of keeps you motivated as you go through the journey, right? So like one thing that we really look for is the product helping the users achieve something difficult? And if it is, the harder it is, the more excited we are if they have already built community in from the start. So that's one. And then the other one is that, you guys have both, Kat and Jesse both mentioned it in terms of having community help each other. So we find the best communities actually just moderate themselves. They emerge like community leaders who just have a passion for helping other people, passion for sharing their knowledge, and they just emerge. And I've seen it in Slack groups. I've seen it in like things like Circle. They just emerge and just take that ownership because they're just so passionate about it. And I don't think it needs to be a large community team that's spending the time that leaders emerge from within the community itself. So those would be two.
That's great advice, because I feel like if you don't do that, you end up spending so much. It can be actually very expensive to moderate communities. I think there was this myth in the world that it was really free to like run a community. And you saw big companies like Facebook getting so big with very little moderation. But you notice that, especially if there's like any anonymity involved, like companies like Secret and Yik Yak, they just immediately devolve into, to insults and name calling and hate speech. And now we're seeing, even with these really big platforms, that there is a cost. There needs to be the like money set aside to moderate these communities, because long term it gets really difficult to build them out. But what's a great opportunity if you're a smaller a community where you still kind of have control of those emergent norms is that if you, instead of saying, oh, we're going to take all of this community management into our own hands, instead you empower some of those like emergent leaders, the people who are posting the most, the people that seem like they're getting the most value out of it. They want that community to sustain and be safe and productive going forward. So reaching out to them directly and just asking them, like, would you like to spend, this much time, maybe a week, like helping us moderate this, or like giving them the kind of powers to say, yeah, if you see something that's wrong, delete it, or just feel free to like jump in and say, hey, that's not what this community is for, and like deputize them, I think is a really important concept. Have you found any like strategies that work well for like reaching out or talking to people like that?
Yeah, so what I'm seeing right now, I somehow managed to get in to the Clubhouse community, and I was really nervous about actually joining because I was like, oh, it's going to be yet another people talking at the group. But there is a set of moderators who are community members who've just been really amazing at pulling audience members in and including them as speakers. And we had a conversation about this a couple of nights ago. The speakers were all women of color, people of color. And we asked the woman, Shweta, actually, who I don't know, I was like, hey, are you a part of Clubhouse? And she said, no, she just was on there, and there's a group like Ashita and a bunch of people who just decided they wanted to spend time with people in an inclusive setting, and they just implemented that. And because of that, once you get past the getting in and all of the stuff around that, it's a super inclusive community, and it's completely run by people who aren't employees. And so I think that's amazing that if you get these people who form an opinion on how they want to behave, it really filters through, because everyone who's been pulled up by them is going to do the same thing when they start a room. They're going to say, hey, someone just joined, I want to be super inclusive.
Shri, one note on that is we use this, we call it like the laptop sticker test, but like people that are willing to assign, like to take on that identity. So those who talk about it, right? Like I'm a part of Clubhouse, I'm a part of Chief, I'm a part of the ComStore, ComChat community. Mm-hmm. Like these are early indicators of community success. And I think that, if you see that happen, it's one of the reasons why Clubhouse has been so interesting. You see that happen and you see quality people and like a very varied group of people feeling that way, they're onto something special. Because it's actually really easy, Josh, to your point, like with a big megaphone, you can get a following on Twitter. Like if you're publishing stuff, you got a big URL. It's very different to have people subscribe to you personally and like want to have you invade their inbox. Like that's a much deeper connection to you.
So I think that's a really good point, Shripriya, that if you can empower people to not only look out for negative behavior, but also to promote positive behavior, that goes a really long way with communities. So one of the things that Clubhouse has been really serious about is that anytime somebody new enters the community, and you can do this for any type of community, anytime somebody enters one of these rooms, they get called on to come and participate, create content, speak on stage. And suddenly, instead of being like, oh, they're hanging back in the wings, wondering like, what's this whole thing about? Like the whole community embraces them, like says welcome, and like wants to know something that they can share and add to the conversation. And I know personally, sometimes I'm like, oh, should I do that? Is this just like a distraction from the community? Is it like noisy and kind of spammy to like be spending time with these personal intros or like, highlighting every new person that joins a community? I think instead, like a lot of times there's a real sense of camaraderie that develops when you're like welcoming people in together and you all feel like you have something like positive that you're trying to express to people. And like you often will find amazing content that comes out when you get these people that are kind of like lurking in the wings and instead bring them on stage and whatever that means for your community and just gets them to help. Shripriya, maybe you just tell us quickly, like you didn't get to give an intro. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about who you are before we jump into our next question.
Sure. I'll try to do this in 30 seconds. I've been in Silicon Valley since '99. I ran global product for eBay for a number of years, which is where my love for community really developed. I went off to a graduate film school before coming back to tech, and now I'm a partner at Sparrow Ventures.
Awesome. So the next question I really want to get into is, a lot of people wonder, like, how much should I invest in this? Because what is the real ROI? And so I'd love to ask you guys a little bit about, like, how does community building positively impact business metrics, specifically like consumer and customer acquisition cost? I mean, personally, like I found that like when you build that community, suddenly you're not doing all of that. You don't have to impress upon them that it's just like we provide all the content, like the community can provide that content. And so I find maybe it's not as it's not always just for customer acquisition, but the retention is what's really important. And long term, like that's what matters in community or user growth or customer building isn't just like how many are coming in, but making sure you don't have a hole in the bucket. And I feel like community plugs the hole in the bucket.
So I think it's a couple of things. I'll jump in and then I'll stop speaking. I think it's both acquisition, because when you have those very active users, and we've seen it with a company called Core, which is a meditation company, we have a handful of users who are so passionate about it. They talk about it in their newsletters. They talk about it in their groups. They literally seek opportunities to tell people to use it. Now, I'm not an investor in Fitbod, but I started using it and I'm like, oh my God, I love this. And I just went out and told people how to use it. I onboarded them. So, there's a passion of like just acquiring users for you. And then also retention. If you have the right tools, if someone has a question and customer service doesn't get to them quickly, there's the community that says, hey, oh, here's how you do it. Or here's a hack that it doesn't do this yet, but here's what you can do. And that feeling of being part of a community and others are helping you solve something is really quite special and important for retention.
I can jump in here too as well. So I think first, having a strong community, as I mentioned earlier, can really help give you early, super valuable product feedback. For example, Stripe, early on, they were super, super active on Hacker News, and they, of course, started building their own community from there. But they became super beloved on Hacker News because they shared their whole process. They asked the community for feedback. They presented what they were doing on a continual basis, and they built that like sense of trust there. And then using YC as an example, as I was saying, companies in the batch often launch to each other before they launch publicly. So they get that feedback from other makers, other builders. And I think that helps them get a great early start. And then second, I think many of the strongest companies grow by word of mouth. So building that community helps get that flywheel of sort of word of mouth growth started early on. And of course, that helps with acquisition.
I'll say one quick thing here. Communities are really to us measured by a level of equal give and take. So like Josh mentioned this earlier, but like it's not just about us broadcasting out. It's about sort of everybody sharing their feedback. And I think you can use a lot of different metrics to know if it's working. There is an ROI calculation for every business, but I'll give you a short story from the early days of WeWork. When people would invite their friends into WeWork, we realized very quickly that it was a way of improving acquisition. And about a year in, we did a quick survey and found out that about 30% of people that came in and toured a WeWork building, walked around with another WeWork member, would actually wind up choosing to move into WeWork. They would meet other people, they'd have a quick conversation, they'd have a cup of coffee. Then the important thing there is that the average person that moved in would take 4 desks. So we effectively had a greater than 100% conversion rate on a per desk basis, which is an unheard of metric and obviously unrealistic and not true in the end. That's not how you actually measure success, but we use that as a clear metric as to why it was worth investing in community and community-driven events. And our investment was in giving the tools and power to our members to actually host those events. And you increase ROI dramatically by enabling your community members to be leaders. And that can happen in tools digitally, but also in the physical world is the way we did it. But what's important is that sort of balance of give and take that your members get.
Yeah, I think those are some awesome points. Like the product feedback thing is huge, especially if your product is relatively early, you're trying to really find product market fit, or if you're a somewhat mature company and you're trying to find your second act. I think that's what a lot of companies are focusing on right now. Is like, you can't just add like little incremental features to something forever. Eventually you need like some big second like tent pole to why people are part of your product or part of your community. And getting that feedback from your most loyal users, they're the ones that are willing to go through the journey of like enduring bugs, enduring like the annoyance of just like something not working quite right, of taking the time to give you feedback. And your casual fans and users aren't going to do that, but the ones that are willing to join a community, they will take the time to sit down with you and say, here's what I really need, here's what I hate about the product. And I think one of the top lessons that YC has always taught is that you don't need to please everybody at first. It's fine to please a niche audience and make them love your product, because then they become those community members that are going to drive that second act and help you iterate over time. And like you said, with the word of mouth thing, it's one thing when you're top down giving people the message of what to share and how to talk about your product to other people. But if you get them talking to each other, it really just locks in that message. And suddenly they don't just hear it, they can actually repeat it. And that's where the weird word of mouth flywheel really gets started, is when you impress that message so deeply in them that they can parrot it to somebody else, rather than being like, oh yeah, I'm part of this thing, I don't really know what it's for, what it's like, but I'm just sort of like a tangential user. If you get into the community, they're like, oh no, here's why it's great, here's how it's helped me, and they're going to be able to make that argument for you a lot stronger. And so one of the other questions I want to ask is about some tools that you can use to help you building community. ComSor is obviously one of them. And this is where I'd love the audience to get involved. I would love you guys to flood the chat with some of your favorite tools here. Type in some of the things that you found have been the most valuable, especially ones that other people might have heard of. Like, yes, Slack is great, but we've all heard of Slack. If you've got some things that that people don't know about, I think that would be super useful. And would love to hear if there's some tools that you guys use that you find helpful in this space.
I haven't used the tool yet, but one that I've been very interested in, I've seen others in the ComSor community use, is one called Hey Summit. And I think the important thing is about these live events are fantastic, but there is a level of connection that happens after these events. And I've already had, even during this chat, I've seen a few like LinkedIn requests and things come in where people want to stay engaged. The idea of finding platforms that let us take all this content and continue to offer it back to the community in the future. So whether it's this talk that we have or something maybe more interesting from earlier, but I think it's important that we find ways to reuse this, and so that was one that struck me as kind of more unique in this world.
Totally. Yeah. Some of the ones that I've seen in the chat that I also really love, Icebreaker is a new product that basically it's like a video meeting tool where you can sit down with a few people and it develops these little like mini breakout rooms with cool like questions that you each take time to answer. And it's a really great way, especially if you're onboarding remote employees or you're taking in new members to like a relatively tight knit and intimate community and you want people to get to know each other. Icebreaker is awesome for just like getting past small talk and getting those deep conversations started, where you might talk about like something that was really challenging but then became exciting in your professional career, and like telling that story, you're going to get to know someone a lot better than just hearing about like, oh, like where are you calling in from, and like, oh cool, like just like the very top level small talk stuff. Another one that I think is really cool is called Zoom URL. It's spelled ZMURL, and basically it's a tool for running paid and doing RSVPs for virtual events. So if you're running a bunch of events right now online and you're trying to get people to like click those Zoom links, it's kind of hard because it's like difficult for them to build a calendar invite out of it. They don't really know what they're doing. And if you want to charge for it, it's like kind of complicated setting up an Eventbrite, and it doesn't really integrate well with the video things. So things like Zoom URL can be super useful if you want to build a community around virtual events, taking RSVPs and even charging for them so you can make it really ROI positive.
The one thing that I found really useful when we were at eBay, it's not really a tool, right? We got really big and we had something called Voices, and we had it from the time we were very young, when eBay was a very young company. 5 buyers, 5 sellers was called a Voices group. And we would have them, and the product group would talk to them before any launch as you were doing ideas. Like once a month, we would talk to groups. And by the time I left, we were at like Voices 20. And we were still talking to all the Voices group, 1 through 20, because they all had different experiences. But a microcosm of the community, if you create a group and just talk to them once a month about like, what are you finding? What could we do? What could we build? And if you're a marketplace, both sides, if you're a different kind of community, make sure all your kinds of users are represented and talk to them. They will not only become stronger evangelists, you'll get amazing information that you would not otherwise get.
For sure. So we're going to wrap things up in just a moment. I'm going to give some final insights, but would just love to hear if any of you guys have some parting words for our guests on things that maybe made a real difference in your career as a community builder over time. I know for me, for example, one of the things that really mattered was when I realized that like it's one thing to be broadcasting content, but like actually going through my replies and like anything that was like a civil, even semi-intelligent reply, trying to engage with those people, it really matters, because not only do they feel like heard and they want to re-engage with your content in the future because they know like, oh, you're actually listening, but the algorithms love that. They want that back and forth conversation because it generates notifications. So if you are living on another channel like Twitter or Facebook, getting those back and forth conversations going in the comments is what's going to rocket you up the algorithm.
I think for me, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
One of the things is explicitly expressing these values to the community. So what we do at the beginning of every batch of YC is we tell the founders, for the next 3 months while you're here, take all the time to reach out to the alumni, to reach out to partners, ask for help, like use all of our resources. And then when you graduate, know that the next generation will come to you and you should be there to help them and support them. And so explicitly saying that, I think in the beginning sets the stage for like what people should expect.
I was just going to say, I totally, you guys do a great job of that at YC. And I was just going to say that you need to invest in community, invest budget and time, and treat it as a pillar of your business. And we think about companies like MongoDB, like they have entire teams and tens of millions of dollars in marketing budget. They call it marketing, but like that is invested in community events online and offline. And so take the time to do that.
Great. So yeah, I'll just say some of the amazing insights that we got from our awesome panel is that like it's important to own your channels. It's fine to rent space from Twitter and Facebook, but make sure that you have some control of your community as well. And if that means like using tools like ComSor or CRM so you can export and get the contact information of people out of those networks so you can contact them elsewhere, that's great. The harder that a community, whatever the task is that a community is trying to complete or the complexity of a product they're trying to use, the more of that, the more you need a community, because that's what's going to like improve that retention long term. If you can build community that's peer-to-peer inside of your company or inside of your network where people are helping each other rather than you just helping them top down, it's going to be a lot easier to get to a breadth and scale of community engagement. The best communities moderate themselves. So deputize your top users, tell them to like promote positive behaviors, welcome people in, get them sharing for the first time, but also to feel free to stick up and delete things or just wield that ban hammer. Like be fast with the ban hammer. I don't think anybody deserves a bunch of strikes anymore. We all know how to act properly online. If you're not acting like that, you're here to troll. Community can really improve retention, but it can also help you drive product feedback. It can teach people the message so they can do better word of mouth. And the more that you empower them to be leaders of your community rather than just like passive participants, the better it's going to go. And there's a lot of tools to help you with this. Tools like ComSor, which is running this community summit, they're going to help you with CRM and being able to generate content, organize people, find those big fans and those top people that could become your moderators and emergent leaders. Things like Icebreaker for doing introductions and getting deeper than just small talk between new team members, Zoom URL for taking registrations and monetizing online events. And some final thoughts are just like reply, be actively engaged and like communicate back with your community, not just in a broadcast format, but in one-to-one. Invest your budget and your time in this because there is true ROI. Clearly lay out your values, because if you really express what you care about in your community, you'll attract the people that espouse those same values. And most importantly, ask for mentorship. If you need help, don't be afraid. There are so many people with tons of experience. Reach out for that mentorship, but then one day when you're in that position of power, become one of those mentors. Help the next generation to build their communities. So thank you guys so much for attending today. Thank you to all our awesome panelists for joining us. And thank you again to ComSor for putting on this awesome community summit. This stuff is so important, especially right now. So I hope you guys can all go out and organize your own communities for whatever cause you think is just. Thanks so much again.